Like memoirs, like graphic novels. What about graphic memoirs? Author and artist Martha Grova is currently working on a graphic memoir, and today we'll be talking all about that, her previous memoirs, writing, and more. So don't go away. Matthew Felix on Air starts now. Welcome to Matthew Felix on Air, people who create, people who make a difference, coming to you from WordSpace Studios in San Francisco, California. Hope you had a great week. For me, it was not only trip preparation, but the unofficial start of my trip. As I mentioned before, I'm getting ready to go to Paris, and so I had to get my apartment ready for my subletter, and I had to pack and get settled at my friend's, where I've been house sitting for the past week before I leave tomorrow. And as I mentioned before, the impetus for my trip to Paris is the invitation that I got from author, filmmaker, and Lit Wings founder Aaron Byrne, who invited me to present at Lit Wings in Paris this Thursday, April 11th. And as I've also mentioned before, each Lit Wings event has one writer, one photographer, and one filmmaker. And so in addition to myself, Ernest White II will be one of the presenters. He is host of the travel documentary series Fly Brother, which just got greenlit by PBS to go live later this year. So congratulations to him, and looking forward to hearing him talk all about his new series. And then also award-winning photographer and writer Lona Merch will be coming from Copenhagen, Denmark. She, of course, was just here at WordSpace Studios doing a residency, and looking forward to seeing her again. And she's been on this show before. And last but certainly not least, Tony Alberto Rigatini will be presenting rather. He's a poet, playwright, and screenwriter, as well as host of or co-host of Spoken Word Paris. So, also, I'll mention that in a second, but I know that Mia Funk, who is an artist and founder of the Creative Process Exhibition, will also be giving a quick update about that exhibition. But like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Long story short, though, if you are in Paris this Thursday, April 11th, please stop by La Caféothèque, which is near the Hôtel de Ville, for those of you who know Paris, at 8 o'clock for what promises to be a great event. In other news, just a couple of hours ago, I was live on the Travel Guys radio show, which broadcasts from KFBK AM 1530 and News Talk 93.1 FM in Sacramento, California, so just up the street. And I had a great talk with hosts Mark Hoffman and Tom Romano about my new book, Porcelain Travels. And I want to thank them again for having me on their show. And that episode, of course, has been archived, so you can go check that out on kfbk.com. As for this show, my video podcast, I will be continuing to do my episodes while I'm in Paris. I will not be able to do them live, unfortunately, due to technical limitations of my cheap laptop. It's not actually so cheap, but it's old, my old laptop. But I'm still going to do 3 shows, and they will still be broadcast at their regularly scheduled time, so Sundays at 6 p.m. And my first guest, or my first guest is actually going to be Aaron Byrne, and that'll be next week. And like I said, she's the one who invited me. She's Lit Wings founder, author, and filmmaker. And so the Lit Wings event will have just happened a couple days earlier, so we're obviously going to talk about that. But besides being founder of Lit Wings, Erin is the author of Wings, Gifts of Art, Life, and Travel in France. And she's the editor of the Vignettes and Postcards in Paris anthology. And she also did a film that takes place in Paris called The Story Keeper. And so, as you can see, Erin is the perfect person to have on as my first guest when I'm in Paris. So we're going to talk all about Paris, writing, her relationship with Paris, with France, and lots more stuff. My 2 other guests that I'll have on the show while I'm in Paris are author David Downey, and he has a new novel out called The Gardener of Eden, and Mia Funk, like I just mentioned a second ago, who will be at Lit Wings doing a quick update on the Creative Process Exhibition, which launched at the Sorbonne and is traveling to 40 leading universities around the world. So I'm going to talk with Mia about her art, because she's an artist first and foremost, and then she also founded this exhibition. And talk about the exhibition, which is a very big deal. Like I said, 40 universities around the world. And also just the creative process in general, her process, creativity, and on and on and on. So 3 great conversations or episodes, shows that I'm looking forward to having when I'm in Paris. Okay, I think that's it for the update. So after this quick message from my sponsor, Wordspace Studios, I will be back to talk with author, poet, and artist Martha Grover. A quick thanks to Wordspace Studios in San Francisco for sponsoring Matthew Felix On Air. Wordspace's mission is to bring together writers and thinkers of all ages and experiences. Wordspace will soon be offering creative writing workshops, a literary book club, and guided writing groups. And Workspace is already offering writing residencies. They are submission-based, and they provide writers with room and board for up to 1 month. To find out more, you can email info@wordspacesstudios.com. Martha Grover is an author, poet, and artist who lives in Portland, Oregon, and is currently doing a residency here at Wordspace Studios. So as I just said in that ad, in case you didn't believe me, we really are doing residencies here. And I think Martha's the second. I think Lona was the first, unless I'm forgetting someone. So I think you're the second. But she is the author of One More for the People and The End of My Career, a finalist for the 2017 Oregon Book Awards in Creative Nonfiction. Her work has also appeared in The Collagist, Volume 1 Brooklyn, and the Portland Mercury, among others. She's been publishing her zine, Somnambulist, since 2003, and she is currently working on a graphic memoir. When she's not writing, Martha makes zines and art, and she sells real estate. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you for having me, especially right before you're leaving to Paris.
Well,
tomorrow, right?
Yes. Well, thank you for coming right before my trip to Paris. So it worked out. I mean, it was sort of a nightmare in a sense, insofar as is there really time to do this? But then it's like, it was also perfect. It came together perfectly.
Yay,
and here we are. So
yay.
yeah. And Martha and I have already been having lots of conversations offline, and it's a shame. We should have been filming our other conversations. Actually, we'd already be halfway done because we covered a lot of ground. And Naomi said, oh my God, you're going to love Martha. You're going to love Martha. And I was like, well, okay, cool. I will. And I think I do.
Oh, that's great.
I'm feeling good.
Even though I immediately took a nap right when you got here and then
she
was
did.
Really out of it.
See, but you don't understand. I took a nap, as I also told you, right before I came. And so I knew that we were seeing eye to eye. And the only thing is, I just did that radio interview while she was napping that I just mentioned. And so my only concern was that you would wake up and have a lot of resentment. It's like...
No, I was out, completely out.
All right.
So it was a good nap.
All right. So all is well. Before we go too far, I want to say that you, myself, whomever, Finn, the pooch that I'm babysitting is outside. He was on camera. I had to move him at the last minute. This is his second week in a row being here. If you've got questions for Finn, feel free to ask. You can see Finn on Instagram. He had the headset on. But I just want to say that we will take questions at the end if there are any questions. So you might already have questions. You might have questions come up as we're talking. Whatever the case, just keep them in mind. And they can be deep. They can be silly. We're really open. And I say we, but really, of course, it is primarily her. If you have a question for me, but I'm here every week. She's not. So we'll focus on her. Okay. Speaking of her and focusing on you, this morning you did an event. I mean, because you're doing your residency here, but you've got to earn your keep.
Yes.
And so they made you do, Naomi made you do a micro essay workshop.
Yeah, it went really well.
Okay.
That's the third or fourth time I've taught that class. I'm very comfortable with public speaking. I started my writing career kind of in slam poetry. And so that's like trial by fire, really.
Yes.
And I do storytelling and I read out, do readings a lot, but teaching really stresses me out.
Really?
Yeah, really. I'm very perfectionistic about it, and really want it to be good. So I was really happy that that class, I've taught it 3 or 4 times. It's kind of a breeze for me now. And we had such a great group of people. And it was everyone was like, oh, it was so much fun. So that was really awesome.
But you weren't dialing it in because you're I've already done it 3 or 4 times.
No, I'm not dialing it in.
You're like, it's no big deal.
No.
I just did it so I could stay here. I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
No.
Is that what I'm hearing?
No.
Okay. All right.
It was just I wasn't stressing about
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And I'm sorry I couldn't join. I really would have liked to have joined. But again, packing, preparing.
Yes.
Okay. So, but for those who don't already know, what is a micro essay?
Well, if you look up micro essay, basically just means small essay.
I understand the Latin.
Or short essay.
No, I'm familiar with the prefix. Can we go deeper?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't think there's a standard definition.
Okay.
But so if you look at, I would say it's like under 1,000 words.
Okay.
So like, but more around like 500 to 600 words.
Yeah.
And usually it's like, to compress meaning into that small of a space, you have to kind of be a little bit more lyrical, a little bit more poetic. And we did read a couple essays today that were stories beginning to end, but it's very hard to tell a whole story beginning to end without using some kind of like poetic language or jumping in time, in 600 words.
Yes.
So we didn't get to read all the essays that I brought in for examples, so I sent them home with them as well, just to like get a wide range of like different things. And I feel like looking, we have the container of the story as writers, but we also have the container of like all these other things that we can tell a story inside of, like a recipe or a list or instructions or a portrait or I can't say the word ekphrasis or it's like when you look at a piece
I don't know the word, so you're ahead of me.
It's like a literary form where you look at a piece of artwork and it inspires whatever you're writing about, or a letter, or so there's like all these different forms that we can use that are shorter forms that aren't poetry, because really it comes down to like poetry versus prose. So if it's not poetry, then it's prose, and then there's all these other things that it could be.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. And so someone coming to a micro essay workshop, though, are they basically just looking for ways to refine their storytelling, to get to the point better, to be more concise? And what's...
Well, I don't know, but I feel like a lot of the feedback that I've gotten is kind of as like a jump start for people, because it's not so like intimidating if it's only 500 words or 600 words.
Sort of a good place to start.
It's a good place to start.
Right.
And it kind of like gets them going again. And I have an idea. And both my books, especially the first book, but we're going to talk mostly about my second book, but my first book has a lot of really short pieces in it. And so if you look at that, you can go, okay, I can make a whole book out of like very short pieces that are thematically the same.
Yep.
So.
Okay. I love that. Speaking of things that you have been drafted to do while you're here, you will also be doing a salon on April 12th at 7 p.m.
This Friday.
That is this Friday
April
already,
12th,
isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
And so what's that going to be about?
So I'm going to do a reading of some published pieces and maybe like an unpublished piece that I've had on my computer for a while, but then I'm going to be doing kind of I think she called it a salon versus reading, because even though I'm going to be doing a reading, it's going to be more of a presentation of the work in progress, which is the graphic memoir that I'm doing.
Yep.
And it's very like I'm at the very beginning stages of it, and right now I'm still trying to like find out what my visual voice is, and so I'm really excited to just like be vulnerable, like the people that were in my class today, just like, this is a rough draft. Yep. Like, I'm just showing you where it's at right now, and this is where I see it going, and maybe getting some feedback from people, like no criticism. Constructive, just like
loving
constructive,
feedback.
And like, this makes me think of this, or blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
But if somebody thinks it's bad, should they tell you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, good. Okay, so I read, and I read your interviews. I read End of My Career. I was getting the titles mixed up. And I looked at Somnambulist, a couple of editions of that as well. And it seems like most, if not all, of what you've done insofar as books has been memoir?
Yes.
Okay. So why memoir? Why is that your focus?
Well, I've tried my hand at fiction, and I'm not great at it.
Good to know our strengths.
Yeah, I'm not super great at it. I have always been kind of drawn to real life, quote unquote, writing, even if it is fiction. I really like Steinbeck, I really like Mary Carr. Actually, the have you read Mary Carr,
No.
The Liars Club? That was the first, I think, legit memoir I ever read. And that was like, wow, that just rocked my world. I was like, I could do this.
Yeah.
Because she's so literary and descriptive, but it's a true story about her childhood. And I had a crazy childhood in a lot of ways. And so I thought, I could do something like this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So you recognize right away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, although some people like reading stories that are fiction that's really cerebral. That's the kind of stuff that I would end up writing, and I don't like to read that kind of stuff. I just want a good story. But if it's like, I don't really like Aesop's fables, right? Like it has some kind of agenda, but that I felt was like what my fiction was, which was like, this is the message. And it's like, I don't like reading that. So
why would I write it?
Yeah.
Although sometimes I don't really read much travel writing. And even though I don't write travel writing in the sense of, and again, this is something we were talking about beforehand, even though I don't write destination pieces. I don't write come with me on this trip, but my stories, particularly in the current book, and of course my Morocco book, I guess I do that, even though neither of those books I ever intended to write, which is why I kind of still feel weird about saying being a travel writer. But I like writing it. I definitely like writing those stories. So I think sometimes there maybe can kind of be a disconnect. We can like to create something that's not necessarily something that we ingest.
Well, travel writing is a weird genre because unlike memoir, it's really specific.
Yep.
Because memoir could be travel writing, but travel writing, vice versa. It's not, it doesn't work,
Which,
like, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
What are you trying to say?
I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'm a memoirist, but it doesn't necessarily mean like, even though I write a lot about like medical trauma, it's not like I seek that out.
Right.
I just want a good story.
Yes.
A true story.
That's, I think, ultimately, I'm there with you on that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a quick look at the word side of things, and we're naturally going to come back to that in much greater detail. But I'm also curious because you're also a visual artist, which oftentimes those two don't necessarily go hand in hand. Certainly in my case, it does not go hand in hand. So can you just tell us a little bit about, and because both of your books incorporate visual art, your zine incorporates visual art, obviously the graphic memoir, which we're going to talk about, that's a huge part of it.
Right.
So can you just tell us a little bit about when you began drawing and painting, and have you always included the visual art with the writing?
Yeah, it was very, it wasn't really intentional for a long time. Like, it was just something that I did because it was easier to do it myself than have someone do it, for my zine, because I've been doing my zine since I was 23. I'm 38 now, so a long time.
Yeah.
And it was just easier for me to do it myself. And I was just like, well, I'm not an artist, so I'll just do it, and I don't care if it's shitty or not,
Yeah.
Then when I got really sick with Cushing's disease, basically was unemployed for a whole year and really just trying to survive. And I just drew all day, and I really got a lot better. And then it's been kind of a process of it's funny because a lot of the stuff that we do creatively is also part of our identity. And so, you get to a certain point on the guitar and you're like, when do I consider myself a guitar player? And that was how art was for me. It was I've done shows, people have paid me to do commissions, I've done all this stuff, but I'm still, quote unquote, not an artist.
Yeah.
And one of my best friends is a children's book illustrator. Her name's Kate Barabay, and she went to school for art and was a painter, and she's she's had a bunch of books published. She won a Oregon Book Awards in children's literature, and she finally just kind of grabbed me by the shoulders and was like, you're an artist, you don't need to be like, well, it's not really my thing. She goes, I have confidence that you can do this. And
and you are doing it.
And I am, you're already doing
That's
it.
The thing,
right.
Too.
Yeah. And I also met, we have it's kind of like Litquake, but it's called, used to be called Wordstock, but I can't remember what it's called, but basically it's a big literary festival in Portland.
Yep.
And I got teamed up to read with a woman named Amy Kurzweil, who's a graphic memoirist. And she also does cartoons for the New Yorker. She's legit, And she said to me, she's like, you could totally do that. You could totally do an illustrated memoir, or you could totally get an agent for your artwork and stuff like that.
Yep.
And it's funny. You need people in your life that are you're not being objective, and I will tell you that you can do this,
No, I so struggled with that before I actually published my book. I had quit my job. I had run off to another country. I was holding myself up in this little house in the middle of nowhere in the Andalusian, southern Spain countryside, writing 6 to 8 hours a day, really, really writing, just, but I still wasn't sure I was a writer. Right. Because first of all, where's the official stamp or the official certification?
Right.
Secondly, because I hadn't published my book and I hadn't won any awards. I didn't go to school for this. So But again, I was dedicating my entire life to it, but I still wasn't convinced that I was right. Because what if it sucked? What if no one cared about it? What if, and even that doesn't really matter. Because the point
that
is,
doesn't even matter anyway.
Right,
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
But, and I like to think of myself as someone who doesn't need external validation insofar as my sense of self and things. I mean, of course, we all do to some degree. But what I realized is in this realm of creativity, whether it's visual, the words, whatever, we do need a little more valid, or at least I need much more validation. And it doesn't have to be that someone's saying it's good. It doesn't have to be, but it's more just basically what your friend said and what we just had in this conversation. No, you're doing this. You are it,
Right.
And the other day I said something to a friend about, when I get there or something like that, referencing like I'm still trying to get there, wherever there is. And she's like, Matthew, you're already there. Stop.
Right.
I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'll feel better when the rent is being paid from being there. But which is also another part of it.
That's a whole other issue. Yeah.
A whole other issue, which we're going to touch on at the end. But anyway, yeah, I think all of us who aren't experiencing over the top fame, so that it's just in your face that you're a massive success.
Right.
And again, where's that stamp? I guess if you get an MFA, that probably helps.
But even then,
because you have an MFA.
I have an MFA from CCA. But even then, a lot of people that get MFAs don't ever get a book published.
Sure. Right.
So are they still writers? I don't know.
And how do they feel?
I think it just depends on if you identify as that, that's what you are.
Amen. And here we are.
Yeah.
And we're identifying as that. Okay. So the reason I wanted to ask you a little bit about words and then a little about the visual is because you did bring them together in your zine, which you started in 2003, however many years that's been. I'm not going to do math on camera. Doesn't matter how simple it is. So that's a zine, and that's obviously I know I heard the term. I've seen zines in some of the indie bookstores and stuff, but I didn't really know that much about them. So can you just kind of, for those people who are watching or listening, probably heard the term but might not be that well versed in what they are. Can you give us a little overview?
Sure. So zine, I'll keep this super short. So zine is short for magazine. That's where the word zine comes from, ZINE. Also, kudos to you because you pronounce somnambulist right. Yeah. So many people do not pronounce that right, and they don't pronounce zine right either. They
say zine? Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh, I never even.
So, but I mean, it's on me that I named my zine really a terrible name.
Yeah.
But
well, it's
not
a great
changing.
name, though. It's actually, it's a great name, but it's a tricky one.
It's tricky.
My publishing company is Solificatio.
Oh.
And I just, so
maybe we're not the best judge of that.
No. I think we're kind of on the same page there. So anyway, so continue. Zines, not zines.
So they got their start in, I think, like the 70s or 80s, where people would do, it was like the primitive fan fiction. So people would do like Star Trek, zines, and it was just for fans. And this was like pre-internet, so it was all about like nerds that were like really into some kind of niche thing, like punk music or feminism or, anything you could think of that had a niche market and that wasn't being represented in the greater magazine. And it was also the Xerox machine was like, oh my God, it's like the printing press, you know?
Yeah.
So anyone could do it. What's funny now is that now that there's the internet, it's like people are like death of the zine because you can just have a blog, but it's like totally not like that. Like,
okay, this was one of my questions.
Yeah, like it used to be when I was in high school and there was like Sassy Magazine or 17 Magazine, they'd be like, make a zine, kids, and it was like that was like where it crested, you know, and then the internet came
when it's
along.
In Sassy Magazine, you know it's cresting.
Yeah. and then everyone was like, zines are dead. So now, but it's so funny because I've been doing this for almost 15 years and I've been to several zine fairs. There's zine fairs all over the world, like, Dublin, Australia, Canada, everywhere. And I've been to a couple of them. I go to the Portland one every year because that's where I live, but I've been to a couple other ones, LA and Chicago. But there's a ton of people that love to do it because there's still people that are not being represented in mass media. There's more intimacy not on the internet. Maybe you don't want your stuff on the internet. Maybe it's so personal you don't even want to put it on the internet. And you only want to print 50 copies and whoever buys them or you give them away, that's it, right? So it's personal expression. It's lack of representation. But it's funny because every year there's like an article that comes out in Huffington Post or whatever that's like, zines are making a comeback, and it's like zines have been making a comeback for like 20 years. So,
but it's an amazing story.
Yeah,
so they're just gonna keep making the comebacks.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, those things.
But I mean, the whole notion of, online versus hard copy reminds me of the whole, ebook versus ebook's going to kill everything, right? We're not going to have any print books because ebooks have arrived, and who needs a real book? And of course, what we found is that ebooks, the last time I saw a statistic, which is harder for me to say than Somnambulist, by the way, was a couple years ago or something, but it was like the ebook sales had plateaued at something like 30% because we still like to have the tangible experience. We still like to hold something. We're looking at screens all day. Even if you don't work, in an office job. I mean,
That's
they're
so
ubiquitous. And so we still like to have that tactile experience.
Yeah. And the beauty of the book.
The beauty of the book itself, the creation itself.
Right.
And so I assume that probably plays a role there.
Totally.
As well,
and
with the whole zine
there's
thing.
also like people want to have a special experience. That's why like you go to a show that's a house show where there's only 20 people there and it's some band you've never heard of because you want to have that experience where it's not like open to everyone. It's like
intimacy.
You were you were the one that had that experience and it was individual.
Yep.
And that's something the internet can't do because anyone can see any website at any time.
Yes, they can.
So
yes, they can. There are issues with the online world. Okay, but let's talk specifically about Somnambulist.
Sure.
So you've been doing it all that we talked about. You've been doing it for quite a while. But and you talked about how zines in general, there's a niche that they're usually trying to address or underrepresentation. So what were you trying to do with Somnambulist?
Well, I don't think I really had
sleepwalkers. Were you trying to help? Because is that what it means? Is it somnambulist would be a sleepwalker?
Yeah.
Right?
And I think I just liked the word.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 23, so I didn't really put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person that doesn't really do a lot of overthinking.
Pre-thinking. I like that. Yeah.
Pre-thinking, overthinking. Yeah. I just kind of jump
in.
Yeah.
Micro-thinking. Yeah.
I just like jump in, and that's really what I did because I was doing slam poetry and then I got really sick of that. And I was just like, I hate this, but what is my next outlet? I was out of college. I graduated. And I actually have a friend, still my friend, Ladina, who said, why don't you do a zine? And I didn't know anything about it.
Yep.
And one of the biggest distributors at the time, because there's these things called distros, that they're like anything, like a wine distributor or a cheese distributor, well, they'll like take from small farms and small vineyards, and then they'll take it to a bookstore for you.
Yeah.
So one of the big ones at the time was Microcosm, and they accepted my first
zine,
edition, my first issue.
Yeah.
And I think it's like back to that thing where you like just need one person to say, this isn't bad. We'll take this.
Yeah, we can actually sell this.
And you're a good writer. And so that kind of just got me hooked. And then you get letters from people all over the world. Like I don't get any letters anymore because people don't write letters anymore. They'll email you.
Yeah.
But it was just a thrill to be like, someone's reading my stuff. Mm-hmm. It's very addicting. Yeah, for sure.
And so what subjects matter?
Well, the first zine I ever did, which I hope anyone that has a copy of it just burns it, but was all about things that I hated.
Oh.
And then I interviewed
little
my
negativity.
family and what things did they hate.
Oh. It became a family affair.
Yes, and that's always kind of been my deal, is like involving my family.
Right.
Yeah, and I have a lot of characters in my family, and so it's always been memoir, but I've had a lot of illustrators that have contributed. I've had a lot of people that have done I've done interviews. I've done commissions. Like one of the ones I did a couple issues ago was on the theme of stuck, because I was talking to a friend and they were like talking about how almost everyone has had something stuck up their nose that they stuck up their nose when they were a kid. And then also just the idea of like getting your body parts stuck in something, and then being in a metaphorical sense, like stuck in a bad job, stuck in a bad relationship. So I only did the artwork. I didn't do any of the writing, but it was like short stories on the theme of stuck. Mm-hmm. So what I like about it is that like anything I can come up with, I can just do it.
You can do it, right.
Yeah, I can just do it.
Yeah.
So
are you working on an issue currently?
My next issue, so my last issue was, again, only did the illustrations, but my mom, it's called Dear Mayor Wheeler, and it's my mom's a homeless advocate for homeless people, and she wrote a bunch of letters to the mayor about his mayor of Portland, and he never responded, and they're really great letters, so I thought we should publish these.
Yeah.
So because this is kind of a long-winded answer, but because I'm really challenging myself with this graphic memoir, I was like, why don't I just do something really easy?
Yeah.
Like, that was easy. I didn't even write it. I just put together my mom's letters. This one, I'm going to do how to clean your house.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about maybe changing it a little bit and calling it, I was thinking about calling it how to clean your fucking house. And then I thought Maybe I should be more specific and be like, how to clean your house and get laid. Because I think a lot of guys don't clean their house, like hetero guys.
Yeah.
They don't clean their house, and it's like freaking disgusting.
It gets in the
Is
way.
it okay if I swear?
Well, as long as my mom's not listening.
Okay.
Which she does sometimes and sometimes doesn't. So I don't know. She hasn't said anything yet.
Okay.
So, Mom, if you're listening after
sorry.
the fact, just fast forward.
Okay.
If you're listening as a podcast.
I'm only saying this because I've been disgusted by the condition of some men's houses that I've been in.
I understand.
So I don't know how much time I want to spend on that. But I was a house cleaner for many years, which you know because you read my book.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't know how to clean their house in like a really efficient way.
And you could help.
And it's like low hanging fruit. Yes. Like it'd be very easy to write about that.
Yeah.
And I don't need to make everything like a huge challenge all the time. No. And just do something easy I can just like.
And it's like
out.
A public service.
It's a public
that you're doing
service.
practically, right? So many straight women would be so just grateful.
Just
You'd
clean
be getting
your house.
You would be getting so much fan mail, even more than you're already getting. I see potential for this issue. Okay, so speaking of house cleaning, you talk about I think you might have started off again. I can't remember, but it feels like it was. No, I think you were first a cheese seller, then you were the house cleaner in the book. Is that the right order? Okay.
Yes, but the first essay in the book is about clean houses.
Okay, all right. I knew it was very early on. And so the book that I'm talking about is her The End of My Career, which is her most recent book. And as I also mentioned, she's published prior to that One More for the People. But, okay, so we've just kind of touched on that. But besides house cleaning, can you give people just a quick idea of what The End of My Career is about?
The End of My Career is kind of a follow-up to the first book, but it's how I'm living with this chronic illness that I basically got after I had an acute illness, which was like acute is going to kill you. Chronic is something that's not going to kill you necessarily, right? So the chronic illness I have is Addison's disease. I don't have any adrenal glands. So it's called The End of My Career because a lot of the essays are about my work life and how I'm balancing my health problems with my work life and like different interesting stories. I talk about being a private investigator. I talk about selling cheese. I talk about house cleaning. And then I also have a lot of essays about my dating life as well.
Yes.
And internet dating and different relationships that I've had. And also like how technology influences those, the internet, dating sites, and also like social media and stuff like that. So
as you can tell, the book covers a lot.
Yes.
And I mean, it does. But it does in a way that's completely cohesive.
Good.
At least for me.
Good.
Which whether or not that's a good judge or not, I don't know. But I did think so. And it's very entertaining. And, you just mentioned a lot of very serious topics, health, work, and then you talk about class and family, disability. But you do it with a lot of humor as well, which we're going to talk about. So, let's just because we're still talking about because you just mentioned house cleaning. I'm just curious. One thing you said about house cleaning that I appreciate in this book is that it was the best job you ever had, and you would still be doing it if you could.
Yes.
I don't know if you still feel that way.
Yes, I do feel that way.
Okay, so why do you feel that way?
Well, I can't do it anymore because one, I would have to work a lot harder to make a living doing it, and basically health reasons.
Yep.
I was my own boss. So I made pretty good money doing it, but I can't really physically do that anymore. It was the best job I ever had because I think that like so many times when you have a job that you work for someone else or something that's not finite, you go in, you work, but you don't feel like you accomplish anything. And there's something to be said for feeling like you've accomplished something.
Yes.
You go into a mess, you clean it up.
Yeah.
And then and people would say, you're a miracle worker. Oh, my God.
The straight man who gets laid. In particular.
Yeah, right. Well, the first essay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, case in point,
right. Right.
The essay in my book, he's like this bachelor. And it was like, seriously, it wasn't like, because I've been in houses before where it's like, oh, my God, like there's rotting food and like it's disgusting.
Yeah.
But there's just like crap everywhere.
Yeah.
And he didn't seem to be able to manage his life in any way.
Yeah.
And then, I won't spoil it, but basically like I'm helping him out in a big way. And because I never met him, that's the weird thing about house cleaning is that you go into someone's house and you don't really know them, but you kind of know them in this weird way because you're in their space. And I was never snooping. But it's just there. It's just there,
right. And it's this weird, you're intimately in their space.
Exactly.
Even again, without knowing them.
Right.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just mentioned a couple times. So you had Cushing's syndrome, which is too much cortisol.
Right.
And then instead you got Addison's after you had your adrenal glands
Right.
removed?
So
getting
my adrenalectomy, getting both my adrenal glands taken out, gave me Addison's disease.
Did you know that ahead of time? Is that just
yeah,
how it
I
works?
knew that.
Yeah,
So usually people are cured from Cushing's because they have pituitary surgeries that take the tumor out that causes Cushing's. But I had those surgeries twice, which I talk about in my first book, and they didn't work. So I had some different options, and I chose to get my adrenals out. I was on just some drug studies that were experimental drug studies for a year.
Yep.
And I just was getting sicker and sicker. And like I even went down to Stanford when I was living here, and they wanted to put me on another experimental drug. And I kind of had just had it. And I was just like, I'm ready to just like move on with my life. It's one of those situations where you're always kind of like, did I make the right decision? But it doesn't really matter because it's made.
Right.
So there's no point in
no going back.
No going back. Because now I have a lot of other like chronic issues. But I can tell you that I'm the healthiest I've been in, 15 or 20 years.
Awesome.
Now.
I wish I had a glass of champagne to cheer that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
glad to hear it.
It's interesting because, getting around 40, people are like, oh, I'm starting to age. And I'm like, I feel like the best I felt, like I was almost dying in my late 20s. Right. So like now I'm feeling better than ever. So it's kind of a weird thing.
So when you talk about Cushing's in particular, I guess both. You do go into a lot of detail, right? So you talk about some of the physiological things that you endure. And as again, we were talking about beforehand, as someone who's just written a book about bathrooms, I could relate to some of your shit talk because there's quite a fair amount of it. Yeah. But just like me, I thought you always did so in a way that's humorous and not graphic, even if you're, we tell it like it is, right. Hopefully in a way that's not, again, we're not doing it to disgust, but also not pretending like it's not part of what's going on.
Well, it's like that book that was like a big seller. It's like Everybody Poops. Everybody poops. So I don't understand people that are like, oh, I hate going to the grocery store and buying toilet paper. It's so embarrassing. It's like, why?
I don't understand that either. Clearly,
everybody poops.
We're not. Yeah, I know. And that book comes up every time I do, like when I'm searching on Amazon to see how sales are or whatever.
Oh, the children's book does?
The children's book, but there's another one that one comes up sometimes, but there's one that we poop 450 pounds a month or something.
That's the name of the book?
Yes, something like that. Or 4,500 a year pounds. I mean, it's some ridiculous. I'm sorry, listeners and viewers. Not going to go any further with that. But the reason I was bringing that up, though, in all seriousness, is it, why did you want to share that kind of stuff? Is it hard to share some of this? Because it's really personal stuff, and it could be embarrassing stuff. We don't normally like to talk, because even with my book, which is mostly funny, I did, and I talked about this last week to some degree, because I just did a stage show based on my book, and in the process for doing that, getting ready to get up in front of a bunch of people and talk about some of the stuff that I've already written about, I did have to ask my question again, like I said last week. Sorry, people who are watching and listening. Am I sharing too much? But then I came around to the fact that I felt I just had to get over it, and I felt like it served the story, it served my art, and I don't regret it. But there were moments where I did question it.
Well, I think that am I sharing too much is a question you can ask yourself for yourself, but not so much am I sharing too much to make this hypothetical audience member uncomfortable, because there's always going to be people that don't like your work.
Right. No, you can't.
Whatever you do, there's going to be people that don't like your work.
Right.
And think that, you're oversharing or whatever. So.
And I was asking more from your perspective.
Yeah.
Less on worrying about, but more just on like, how much am I comfortable sharing with the world at large, whether they like it or not.
Yeah. So the question is like, do I ever ask myself, am I sharing too much?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I share what I'm comfortable sharing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I'm not, like, there's the scene in the book, the title essay is The End of My Career, and it's about me being a private investigator for workers' comp claims. So basically, I'm employed by the insurance companies, and I'm investigating people that have made workers' comp claims. At the same time that's going on, it was the worst job I've ever had in my life, and it gave me so much stress. I had chronic diarrhea the entire time that I had the job.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was so stressed out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was going up against a federal disability claim that I had because I was so sick I wasn't able to work for a couple years. And I had to go and tell, quote unquote, my story in front of a judge. And that's way different than telling poop jokes.
Yes.
Because if I'm just telling poop jokes, it's like I give people the opportunity to make something that's like lighthearted and like funny. But if I'm telling a judge just like, will you give me this money and somehow validate me and somehow redeem with money this time in my life that I was not like a productive citizen. It's this whole level of like trauma. And that was terrible. That was like, I almost didn't do it, which is crazy when you think about like you have the chance to like get some federal money for being disabled. And the idea of telling your story is so frightening to you as a memoirist, even that you don't even want to go to the appointment. I mean, that's crazy.
And I would like to read a quote from that section. This is the next thing I had. This is on page 123 of your book. You said, quote, "There's this thing that happens when you're sick. People don't believe you. I can't tell you how many times I have faced disbelief, dismissal, and downright contempt from people who don't want to believe that the seeming," and this is a variation on what you were talking about, but this really stood out for me. Downright contempt from people who don't want to believe that this seemingly healthy person in front of them is actually incapable of holding down a full-time job.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, it's like, it's not the same, but there's the analogy to like survivors of any kind of abuse that's like, you've just, it's like, well, what were you wearing? Or like, what did you say?
And having to prove.
Yeah. Having to prove this like burden of proof on you all the time. And that's why, I would encourage you, if you're at all interested, to read my book, because that's what I was up against with these people that were being doubted that they hurt themselves on the job.
Right.
It was such a mind.
Right.
It was so ironic that was all going on at the same time in my life, you know?
Yeah. Quite the dichotomy.
Yes,
there.
For sure.
So another thing that you talk about in a way that I really appreciated and is serious but funny, but also, again, like with the poop, just sort of matter of fact.
Yeah.
And because it is just part of our experience and it's universal, which is the sex and the relationships. But particularly the sex, I just really appreciated how so often the sex is just mediocre, right? You're not trying to, every scene is not some hot sex scene. You're just being very frank, and in a way that so often is not how sex is portrayed. And I mean, sometimes the sex is good, sometimes it's great, but sometimes it's just kind of okay. Or sometimes you're questioning, why did I even have sex with that guy?
Right.
Like, really, what's going on?
Right.
So can you tell me a little bit more about how that fits in?
Well, I think, something, when I was writing my first book, I had this whole long essay about growing up in the country and how great my childhood was and blah, 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 and how with these woods. Well, the end of the essay, my parents didn't have any money, so they cut all the trees down.
Oh, no.
So my editor and publisher, well, he was my editor and publisher. We had other editors anyway. He said, we're cutting that whole thing except the last paragraph about the cutting down the trees. And I was like, what? And he goes, no one cares about your happy childhood. And it's like, unless you're like telling the story where like the good sex is like a part of a love story, but I'm not telling the really love stories in this book. So it's like, it's not interesting. Like, it wouldn't be interesting to just be like, and then I had some like hot sex with this guy. It was great. It's like, no, I'm having like a lot of like not so great sex.
Right.
And that's kind of the point of the whole story.
Yeah.
So
So that,
and people don't talk enough about that, I think.
Well, that's why
it's
I'm calling it out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I'm calling it out.
It's like awkward. Like, people have like awkward sex, or like not like gross sex, or like, whatever. And it's interesting to me, because it's the same thing. It like helps people like go, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that isn't having like mind-blowing sex all the time.
Well, again, it's real. And I just read an article last week, 2 weeks ago, something in the UK Guardian about how I think 20-somethings, I'm not going to get the exact statistics right.
I saw that.
How they're having the least amount of sex ever for their age group or something like that.
That's why I thought why they had the idea of like, get laid, clean your house, or clean your house, get laid.
Because you saw the marketing opportunity.
Yeah, it was like, clean your house. Maybe that will help. Yeah.
But one of the things in that article, then, I don't know if you'll remember this part, was that they were postulating that it's because, and of course, porn gets blamed a lot, and there's debate whether porn is actually the problem or not. But in this point that they made in the article, it made sense to me, which was this idea, which goes directly to what we're just talking about here, that because particularly the youngsters who have grown up with this is their sexuality is informed so much with the screen, with the porn, right? That everything is so quote unquote perfect. And that's not how it is in real life. So when something happens in real life, which inevitably is probably 60 seconds into their experience, that's not picture perfect and not just going smoothly with no, then it's a turnoff, or they feel insecure, or so there's this again. There's still
I think as a woman, I have a couple points to make. I don't know if you read the same article, because the article I read didn't mention porn at all.
Okay,
but it talked about how people are getting into couples later in life, so that
I saw one of those
they're
as
not
well. Yep.
they're not having as much regular sex because they're single.
Different article.
Yeah.
I saw that one too.
And then also like people don't have a lot of money and they're living with their parents, and it's hard to have sex with people when you're living with your parents. Blah blah blah.
Yep.
But I did. So the article I read, I was like, well, porn's a factor. I don't think there's just like one factor why people are having less sex.
Yep.
But I do think as a woman, as a heterosexual woman, watching porn, it's like very male oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And so I may be aroused by it, but it's not like my ideal sex at all. Even the way it's shot, everything is like not so much a turn on for me. But I can see from a man's point of view, yeah, that would be super intimidating. I mean, everyone's got an enormous penis. They can like last forever.
Right.
The women are like, oh my God.
You're amazing.
You're amazing, And it's like, that's just like not regular.
The bar is very high.
The bar's high, for guys, but for me, I'm like, well, it's not really what turns me on the most, but like it does the job, like whatever. But I also am just like, I don't need to see that like angle, like that doesn't do anything for me.
Right. Yeah.
So but I do think that that's like a factor for sure, and it's I think there's just like a lot of pressure put on men, and I think maybe what they need to do is talk to more women and find out what women don't give a shit about a lot of that stuff. That might be what turns you on, but like women, so you can have
and
good sex and not be a porn star,
right. And if they had the conversations and understood what their partner is actually into, that's like, I don't have to maintain my erection for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is in the last.
But I also think there's this interesting thing that's happening in society now with the advent of like sex bots and porn, and a lot of people are saying that they're lonely, But I do think that like if more people wanted to be in relationships and having in real life sex with actual real people, they would be doing it. And maybe some of these people are not like lonely and, incels. Maybe they're okay with their life not having sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if they really want, I kind of feel like if you really want it, go out and do it.
Mm-hmm. But I think you make a really good point. That's the other thing. We're operating again at this sort of macro level here, at the assumption that everyone should be wanting to have sex all the time. Right. Which isn't necessarily the case.
It's going on dates and like meeting people and finding someone you like enough to have sex with is a drag.
Okay, so let's talk.
I can see why people don't want to do that.
Right.
And they're just satisfied with whacking off,
Right.
So I get that.
Thank God for whacking off. Okay. I'm going to read a quote along those lines that you said in an interview in 11pdx.com, and this was a couple years ago. Quote, I've had actual relationships from people I've met on OkCupid, and then this funny thing happened after my last relationship ended. I decided to go back online, but take it really slow and see how things progress. I've had the worst dating year of my life from that. Laughs. So thoughts on that? How's it? What are your current thoughts on that? Because again, and the only reason I'm asking is because this is a big part of what's in the memoirs, right?
Right. So that was the year that was like what made it into the book. Yeah. And it's funny because I did think about what am I going to talk about on this interview is that I'm still dating, internet dating. And I was in like a 6-month, I think, relationship like about a year ago. And then I'm going on dates or whatever. And I feel like I've already written about it. And it's like, so it's almost more demoralizing because I'm like, I can't even write about it because I've already like written about it. It's like, it's the same day over. So I feel like I'm kind of like Groundhog's Day. It's like the same day over and over again. But what's interesting about the book, the end of my career, and I do think that it's interesting, and what was happening is kind of this awakening in me of, I've always considered myself a feminist, but it was like things kind of were coming to a head in my life. And some of the stuff I actually had to take out of the book was the more personal stuff about my sister's divorce. So it's the beginning, the women's studies major, that essay. So my older sister got a...
I'm sorry. I know what that is. Can you just tell?
So I dated a man who was a women's studies major.
Best guy ever.
Best guy, right? Like on paper,
on
I was like, oh, women's studies major is so woke,
Right.
Of course, every guy I told was like, what? He's just probably a psycho. Stay away from him. And I was like, what are you saying?
No,
that
he's
like,
so sweet.
no, I was just like,
we really connect.
Yeah. And they were all like, warning,
run,
warning,
run.
run, you know. He turned out, of course, I got really high one night and Googled him and got paranoid, and was like, I should Google him, and Googled him.
Right.
Turns out he had a history of domestic violence. And finding that out when you're incredibly high out of your mind, like
Bad
I was
combination.
way too stoned.
Bad combination.
And I kind of had a freak out, didn't sleep for 24 hours.
Called a lot of friends and your
Called
mom.
a lot of friends. But at the same time, and I do talk about it in that essay that was going on, I took some of the stuff out of there. But my sister went through a divorce, and her 20-year marriage ended right around the time that I met this person. He had the same name as my ex-brother-in-law, which was so weird.
Like first and last?
Not last,
just
but first name.
Still enough to be weird, yeah.
And it's not like a common name, so that was a little weird.
Yeah.
And we didn't understand how that marriage was very abusive. And so as my sister was going to counseling and getting educated on abuse, I was also getting educated on stuff like emotional labor, how patriarchy and sexism and abuse all kind of like intersect,
Yeah.
And it's funny because just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I went on a date with a guy who I was like, oh, I know who you are. Like, it's like that show. I've been watching the OA. Have you ever watched the OA?
I don't know the OA.
Okay. Well, basically the theory, it's like a very like fantastical, it's a Netflix show.
Yeah. Very
fantastical. And it's like there's different dimensions. And like, if you're not connected with someone in this dimension, you're never going to be able to escape them. So, and I really felt like the universe is sending me this person that I've met before because he was a total abuser.
Yeah.
He said things that I almost felt like verbatim had come out of my ex-brother-in-law's mouth. It's like, why do schizophrenics all have the same delusion that the government put a chip in their head?
Right.
Like, why do they all think they're Jesus? Like, what is it?
There are certain commonalities.
There's
right.
commonalities with like this disease almost. And it's the same with men who are abusive.
Yep.
Where it's like, the guy said to me, well, women just love to ruin men's reputations and drag them through the mud. That's what he said to me.
I hope you were in a public place.
Yeah, we were. I was like, check, please.
Yeah.
And then also he said, well, what do you have to give a man?
Oh.
And I wanted to be like, I didn't know what to say. I should have said like, big titties and a fat ass. Like,
that's
what do you want me
said.
To say?
Or you could have said, actually, what I have is this red flag that I found underneath my chair. A big red flag.
Yeah.
Look that way.
Yeah.
And run.
He also said his ex-wife, he didn't have enough influence on his children, and she wouldn't let him see them as much as he wanted because he didn't have influence on them, and she was turning them gay.
But you know what's oh, God, no.
Like,
But you know what's really mind-boggling? Is that people like that don't realize they shouldn't be saying those things. To me, that's even because it's bad enough that they do think those things, right? And they're asked those questions, and but to even not have the filter to realize, well, probably shouldn't let her know these things.
Well, this is something that I will never ever quote Dr. Phil except in this moment. But he did a thing.
I'm glad I'm the one getting this on film and audio. Go ahead with Dr. Phil quote.
I don't know why I was watching it, but
this is her favorite Dr. Phil quote of many. She was quoting him before we went on air. Yes. What's your favorite Dr. Phil quote?
I was like, happenstance, like the TV was on. He was talking about those internet scammers from like Nigeria.
It wasn't your fault, I think is what I just heard you say.
It wasn't my fault.
Right.
It was just on.
Right.
But he was talking about the scammers from like Nigeria. Like, I'm a Nigerian prince and all this stuff. And it's like, who would believe that?
Yes.
But they make it that in the bad spelling and everything. They do it because if you're going to fall for that, you'll fall for anything. And I feel like abusers do the same thing where it's not like they're like, oh, I shouldn't say this because she'll think blah, blah, blah. They're like, she's going to see me as the victim. If she's going to take my side, even though there's no evidence, then I got her.
It's a test. It's like a litmus test.
Oh, totally.
Interesting.
Totally.
Oh.
The whole I'm the victim. My ex was like terrible. That's like,
you know what disturbs me
one.
then is it sounds like they're smarter than I am because I didn't realize they were doing it on purpose. Oh, God.
Well, I mean, if you read my book, too, it's like I went on several days. I was dating this person for for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, but he wasn't that explicitly. I remember.
But our first date,
you had to go find him online.
To find out he was like violent. But our first date, he was like, I was tricked into being married and I have PTSD.
He did tell you about the
blah,
PTSD,
blah, blah, blah.
right.
I mean, he was like, woe is me, get out my violin, like on the first date,
Right.
like. And now
there were signs.
There were signs. And at the time I was like, oh, but now I'm like, this last guy I wanted to do, I was like, you're pathetic.
See, because
That's
now
pathetic.
You know the signs, though.
now I know the signs.
And this is a whole other conversation, but that's the other thing is sometimes people who get their first Nigerian scammer email.
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
I mean, that's the other thing.
Right.
Sometimes we have to be gentle with ourselves too. We can't, if you haven't been in an abusive situation or know someone immediately, you might not know the signs. You might not, and you might just feel compassion for the person.
No, and I don't mean to say that like people that are in abusive situations aren't like smart enough.
Well,
whatever,
then why did you say that? Kidding. You didn't say that. Don't worry.
It took me a long time to like, and it was partly my sister, part my own experiences to like now know that like there's definitely signs because like as women, as heterosexual women, we are basically trained in the patriarchy, and so of course we're like sitting ducks in a lot of ways. So
right. Okay, we could go on and on about this because it's obviously a really important one. Thank you for that. But I also. It's already 7:00. We've already been talking for an hour, so we're just going to go considerably over today.
Okay,
because
sure.
I have too many have to asks because I always have some things that I know I might have to skip over the interest of time, but there's still too much. So people listening and watching, you're just going to have to bear with us. Because I want to know just a little bit. I'm always interested in process, and I know it's a really big topic, and I'm just going to throw it out there as sort of a wide open question. And we are going to talk specifically about your graphic novel, or graphic memoir. Yeah. So I'm really talking more not specific to your current, just in general, particularly given that you use words and images and bring them together. How do you? And maybe you want to focus on the last book. However you want to approach it. Just some insight into your process.
Well, I did go to grad school. Yep. And I have a lot of I bristle at like prescriptive, like this is what you should do. Yep. And da 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 da. I had a teacher that was like, you must be writing 3 hours a day. And I was like, what's so special about 3 hours? Yep. Like, it's just so arbitrary.
Or even every day. Just this idea.
Even every day, right.
You hear that? I actually, I Googled or looked on a search engine about that for my last episode 2 episodes ago. I had author Nona Kaspers on, and we were talking about her process. And I looked ahead of time, and I was specifically, because I saw that she doesn't write every day. And her book, if you haven't read her most recent book, which title I won't remember off the top of my head. I can see it. The Fifth Woman. Thank you. I can see the blue cover and the like rain. Exquisite book. And so when I was reading about her process and to see that she doesn't write every day, I thought, okay, if she doesn't write every day, then none of us have to write every day. But I Googled just out of curiosity, and I don't actually use Google. Whatever I used. And just this list of writing every day, how to keep writing every day, da-da-da. So there's this sort of common, what's the term? Common...
I don't know, ethos,
wisdom or whatever.
Yeah,
that we're supposed to be writing every day.
Yeah,
you just keep at it.
So I've had a lot of conversations about this, and my friend Anthony Alvarado, who's a writer, is like, well, if I don't write every day, then I get out of the habit of doing it. So I think it's helpful for some people to stay in a routine. I personally don't feel like it really helps me, but I did go through a period of my life where I did write every day, and I feel like if you train your brain to think like a writer, that is what it takes, is like some kind of like building that muscle. Yep. And it was the same with drawing. I don't draw every day, but I went through a period of my life where I drew like 3 or 4 hours every day. And that helps you to learn how to do the craft. And so then you get it back on a bicycle. You know how to ride the bicycle, right? Yep. Obviously, you're going to be better. You're going to get more speed.
Warmed up or
whatever if you're doing all the time. But like, I just feel like those hard and fast rules are really... So basically, though, back to like me personally where I'm at right now... Yep. I feel like it would be very easy for me to write another book of essays because I've done that twice now, and I have some material that I could work into another book where I just think about something and then I have an 8-hour day where I just bang it out, and it's not finished, but it's pretty much done. Yeah, the essay. Yeah. But it's different with drawing because a lot of the conceptual stuff happens in your head and you're not really doing it. And then you're just digging ditches because you're just drawing the lines and doing the color. And you can't listen to a podcast or watch a movie while you write a book of essays. But with drawing, you can. Yeah. And it's like really throwing me for a loop.
I need to go into drawing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you still have to like conceptualize it. Yeah. But then the actual ditch digging is just that. It's just the labor of doing it. Yep. And it's, in a way, it's way more time consuming because it takes a lot of hours to actually make it. It doesn't matter if you're doing it on the computer or by hand. It's just like
still labor intensive.
Very, very labor intensive.
Yep.
And so that's something that's kind of like hitting me in the face. Like, oh, like everyone talks about how hard it is to write a novel. Try doing a fucking graphic memoir. Like, it's going to take me like 7 years. It's so much work.
Yeah.
To make it good.
Well, if you're going to do it, you better do it right.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You've already set the bar with the 2 previous books and the zine. So
I want to do something beautiful. That's what I want to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why we do this.
Right.
Whatever form that beauty might be, but we want it to be beautiful.
I want it to be beautiful for sure.
Okay, so beautiful transition, speaking of beauty, to the graphic memoir.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's called The Creationists. Is that for sure?
Right.
Working title.
Sure,
we'll call it the working title.
Yeah.
So again, though, I'm just curious about graphic memoir. I looked on Wikipedia beforehand.
Right.
No reference to graphic memoir.
Right.
There were references to graphic novels because that is now a genre that most of us know.
Yeah.
Graphic memoir, is this a thing that's already out there, or is you just kind of bringing these 2 things together? She just spilled her hidden bottle of wine.
It's empty though. It's empty.
The empty. Well, I don't know if
that's
that's better. Yeah. It's okay.
I drank it all already.
Right. I told her she wasn't allowed to drink from the bottle on camera. Okay.
So maybe it just hasn't caught up quite yet, but it's basically just a graphic novel that's a memoir.
Right.
Have you heard of Fun Home?
No.
Okay, so that's it's like funeral home. It's like a memoir of this woman that grew up. Her parents ran a funeral home. They made it into a Broadway play.
Oh.
It's like, I think it's Alison Bechtel. I may be wrong with that. So that was a big one. I've read a lot of them. But basically, it's the same idea. Yeah, they're out there. They're not quite as big as graphic novels, but they're starting to because a lot of that I think is coming from the webcomic. A lot of people do like web comics where they'll do comics about their life, or like daily comic, what I did this day, and it just like naturally goes into doing a full length memoir.
That it becomes sort of like your zine became the first book, largely.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay,
all right. And I'm hesitating because I think we probably already answered this. I was going to ask you, what drew you to it, but I think you just kind of said, that you had already done 2 traditional memoirs, not traditional, but just, books of memoirs.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you just really kind of wanted to branch out, maybe give a little more emphasis on the visual part of your creativity. And
yes. Yeah. I wanted to challenge myself for sure. Because I wanted to do something different. I wanted to challenge myself. And I also felt like the material that I had written that didn't make it into the last book, or that I'd written since, was so all over the place. And I kind of wanted to do something more experimental, because I had done the essay thing, and like a lot of the stuff that I've written since then was more like prose poetry. It's like very weird, and it's those things that maybe I'll have to sit on for a while before they can come into a collection. And I just love drawing. Like, it's something that is so satisfying for me that I was like, wow, can I do more of this in my life?
So tell me, if you can, though, because it's still a memoir, it's a different format, different media. How will the content be different, or is it still really going to be the same similar themes, because it's still your life and it's just different takes on them based on where you are today?
It is going to be, I would have to say, it's going to be about my childhood. I was homeschooled till I was in 6th grade, and my mom was very religious at that time, and my dad went along with it, more or less. And she believed that evolution was false and creationism was true. I actually have a 23-foot long timeline that I bought just to do this project that we had when I was a kid, that was based on the Bible. So it was like, it had all these different like patriarchs from the Bible. That was like Noah, he lived 950 years. Like,
he was very old.
It was like true, and the reason why I got this idea for this book was because of Trump, because this whole thing about like fake news, and how that's just fake, like, even though it's like just accredited, very dismissive.
Right.
And
convenient.
We're so polarized in our country right now. And I feel like people, sometimes you talk to them and they are living in an alternate reality. And I realized, I grew up in an alternate reality. I grew up in an alternate reality where it was like, I was homeschooled, we live in the country, that evolution's false, even though 99% of everyone believes that. They're wrong.
Yep.
There was the secular world, there was the Christian world,
the us and them,
and also as a kid, it's like the known and the unknown. How do you know if something's true? How do you know if something's not true? And so those kind of themes are what I'm working with in my book right now. So, and then my dad became an atheist when I was 15.
Still together with your mom.
They're still together today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think this is going to be the riskiest material I've done that I'm going to have consult with my parents, not necessarily give their okay, because they will never say that's not okay with me. They've told me that, like, you do whatever you want. We'll give you shit the rest of your life for it. Yeah. But we're never going to tell you no.
Right.
You know? Right. And so I do have to consult with them, because it's not only about my spiritual journey, it's about my mom's spiritual journey and my dad's, I don't know, non-spiritual journey.
Despiritualization.
Yeah. And so it's about them as well.
Yeah.
So
it's more like a heads up and sort of checking in, and so they're not caught off guard.
And
is it accurate
too?
Is it accurate
to you?
Yeah.
Do you want to put any input into it? So,
so that you're representing their experience more or less. Yeah. Okay, so I want to say to those of you who are listening and or watching, actually, Actually, it could only be those of you who are watching, because it's not on the podcast yet. Although if you're listening, it is now, but that doesn't matter, because then you can't actually DM in. Anyway, if you're on Facebook Live right now as we're live and you have any questions, I'm going to ask for them relatively shortly. So now would be the time to start queuing them up and sending them in. The last thing I want to ask about is very much off topic, what we've already talked about, except... there is a common theme, which is you and also creativity. And it's something that I'm really curious about and I've almost done myself. And so when I saw that you were doing this, I knew that I wanted to ask you about this. So Patreon. So for people who don't know Patreon, it is a way, it's sort of like Kickstarter, but it's more a subscription sort of model, where if you have an artist or a podcaster or a writer or whomever doing anything creative, producing an online TV show or podcast, whatever it is, but that they don't have support. They're not at that stage in their evolution where they can get advertisers or where they've gotten grants or whatever it is. They need money. And they're producing something that you like. You can subscribe to them using Patreon. And so I've almost done that a couple times for this. As I told you before we went on there, I did not anticipate buying this lovely computer that you guys can't see. But that I had no choice to buy if I was going to do this, which I found out, very sort of late in the game. Anyway, lots of expenses that people have no idea about that I didn't even anticipate. Never mind the book stuff. Never mind publishing the books. Never mind all the marketing money. There's so many costs that people who haven't done it have no idea, right? And so anyway, point being, it is challenging today as a writer, artist, creator of any type to make a living and to get this income. Or any kind of income. So Patreon is potentially a great way to do that. And one of the reasons I was interested is, besides just general curiosity about your experience, is some of my friends on Facebook recently, someone posted, a writer, and asked about people's experience with Patreon, and this really surprising conversation ensued where a lot of people who I consider very progressive and who I would have thought would have been very much for this came out against it. And saying, it's just a way of, people sort of, it's a con, and people should they should figure out other ways of getting money, this, that, and the other.
Can you tell me why they thought it was a con?
I think we would have to ask them. I'm trying to remember. I think primarily it was just the concept. Now, interestingly, these people did not know much about it. Okay. So I think it was more of a knee-jerk sort of reaction to this idea of someone not having to work and getting money coming towards them. Now, of course, I immediately responded, my understanding of Patreon is the whole idea here is that it's an exchange. Right. You are supporting someone because they are producing something that you deem valuable, whether it's in a podcast that's entertaining or informative, or it's a book that probably wouldn't have been published otherwise if the person didn't have your help funding that.
Right.
And I think my takeaway from that conversation was that we're so, even fellow writers and artists, all of us, again, because it's kind of like the patriarchy paradigm, right? We're so into it that sometimes we don't realize it, or oftentimes don't realize how it affects our views and what have you. And I kind of came away from that thinking that people really have trouble not seeing everything as like a dollar value per hour, this commodification, and that the idea of doing it this other way seemed easy. And and it's not easy.
Right. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Not at all. Yeah.
So I was just curious if you had any hesitation getting into it, if it's worked well for you, if you had any pushback when you did launch your page, or if it's
not to my face. I mean, maybe people thought that and didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Why is she asking me for money? But I'm just like, I'm the kind of person that's like, if you don't want to give me money, don't give me money.
That's my take
whatever.
on it.
Yeah,
that's my take on it.
Yeah. So I didn't know anything about Patreon, but I met a great writer, Susan DeFreitas, who used Patreon when she published her first book of short stories. Mm-hmm. And I met her at a birthday party. I'd never been before. And she talked about, I just got $100 a month, on Patreon. I go, what's that? And she told me about it. And immediately I was like, whatever this is, I'm on
Sign me up.
I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Because one quote, I'm not going to get the quote right, that I love is not Dr. Phil, but
you've already said your favorite Dr. Phil quote.
Nicole Georges, who actually did two graphic memoirs, I think. She's a cartoon artist and from Portland, really talented, but she teaches cartoon studies or whatever, different art schools. And she says she always loves it when people are like, how can I become a successful cartoonist like you? And she goes, work for free for 15 years, making no money.
Yeah.
So I think the most I ever made was like $650 a month off my Patreon. Mm-hmm. Now I'm down because I lost some donors, bigger donors, and people, their cards are declined and then they don't.
They
whatever,
don't,
blah, blah, blah.
Their new card or whatever.
Years.
Yeah.
It's like how much pestering do you want to do to get the extra $20, whatever.
Right.
So it kind of goes up and down. But so I have a lot more than a lot of people do. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But that's only because I've been putting out a zine for 15 years.
Yes.
And have a huge list of people's emails and their mailing addresses, and I've done mailings and I do readings all the time and whatever. And it's and I'm still making $492 a month. And I'm grateful for that.
Right.
That helped me get an art studio. That helped me pay my rent, my car payment, whatever I needed.
Right.
But it's not like I'm making $1 million. It's still less than $500 a month.
You haven't bought an island.
And that was, I have not bought an island.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was because I'm an established person with a record that people are like, I want to throw down $1 a month.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's people that I haven't run into a lot of critiques about Patreon on that account of it's what other system or platform can people sign up and give you $1 a month? You know how hard it would be to be like, oh, I'm going to drive over your house and give you $1 this month. That's just
it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
And then you have access to things on my Patreon page that are just for the patrons. And if you subscribe at $10 or more, I'll send you something in the mail. If there's different levels, t-shirt level or
and do you find that those
or whatever? Yeah.
Do you find that the incentivize? Is that the word?
Some of them do, some of them don't. I feel if people have it in their budget, it's more I just want to support you.
That's kind of my suspicion.
Yeah, $1 I'm poor, I'll give you $1. And some people are I don't care what you give me, but I'm rich and I'll give you 25 or 70 or however much.
Yep.
But I feel the one incentive that does for me personally is the $5 level, which is that as long as you're subscribed to the $5 level, every time I put a zine out, you get a zine.
Yep.
Because that's something I've already been doing and people want it and value it.
Yep.
Everything else is just whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But I would recommend people do it. But I also think that if you have no kind of track record as an artist in the community or online, it's going to be it'll just take time.
Yep. Exactly.
All
right. Good insight.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
That'll be $10.
That'll be $10. $10 a month or just $10 now?
Consult. Patreon consult.
Okay. And I'll be billing you for this podcast. So we'll see if we can work something out. Okay. So let's talk about what you have upcoming. So we already talked about in the beginning, Wordspace Studios Salon on Friday, April 12th at 7 p.m.
1229 Diamond Street. That's the address.
Yes, that's the address.
This Friday.
And your links are... Well, first of all, is there anything else that's upcoming that we need to let people know about?
I don't think so.
That's the imminent.
If you want to check out my Patreon page, it's just patreon.com/Martha Grover. And I'll put artwork that I'm working on with my graphic memoir up there and new zines that are coming out. I don't know if I'm going to do the, clean your house and get laid thing or just clean your house.
Well, I think we may have just launched it. So I think, either one. Yeah. I mean, whatever it is.
I don't want to guarantee people that they're going to get laid if they clean their house. Like they may have a terrible personality. I'm just saying, like that's.
But
where
here's
my
the thing: if
waffle
you can,
on that.
but here's the thing: if you can tie that to your Patreon, like if you can guarantee that, that is a high level of Patreon subscription. That's like the $1,000.
Oh yeah,
whatever
yeah.
level.
Maybe in a territory
Maybe
that I'm not comfortable with.
We could be. It depends on local laws.
Yeah.
I guess we could now be. Just incorporate Nevada and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. I think this is a great time to wrap things up.
Yeah.
I had so much more we could have talked about. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank
and very
you so
interesting.
much.
And I loved your book. And so the book, again, the current book, the most recent book, The End of My Career, the book before that, One More for the People, the I was going to say the simulcast, the zine.
Yeah.
Is Somnambulist, which I think is where simulcast was coming from. Somnambulist, which is also, you didn't say this, but somnambulistzine.com.
Yeah.
No one is ever going to go there unless they get there via your Patreon page. So I'm not even going to spell it.
So
Usually I spell those things.
Don't even worry about it.
Don't even worry about it. Patreon.com/Martha Grover.
Yeah.
Martha, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
This is great.
Super fun.
All right. That is all for today, although I wish it weren't. Thanks again to my guest, author Martha Grover. Thanks to Wordspace Studios for hosting me. They, again, are at wordspacesstudios.com. Next week, author, filmmaker, and The Wings founder Aaron Byrne from Paris. And thank you for watching and listening, as always. I really appreciate it. If you liked the show, would you please share on social media and subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen or watch. It really helps. And again, I really appreciate it. For more about me, my website is MatthewFelix.com, and links to my social media, books, including my new one, Porcelain Travels, other podcasts, and all the rest can be found there. If you have any comments, ideas for the show, or just want to say hello, I would love to hear from you at FelixOnAir@MatthewFelix.com. Thanks again for watching and listening, and I will talk to you next week from Paris.